Hi, with Julian on the Brown Notes after a very long hiatus. And Dan Andrews and the destruction of the Murdoch press. What a satisfying election result it was in Victoria. Yet, as with the federal election, which I called 3 weeks out in a video, there was never any doubt. The reporting has emphasised probably the main reason for this channel existing, which is that Australia has the worst news media in the world, in a developed country. In fact, as I've said many times, we are just behind the state-owned media of China and Egypt for the third most concentrated print media ownership on earth. And we see this now, that there is no left or right in the media. I mean, most corporate media is never left-wing, but what we did have 10 years ago, maybe more, was The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald able to provide a counterbalance to the overwhelming dominance of the Murdoch press. And it's not just the Murdoch press, it's the TV, it's radio, it's pretty much everything. And now that the Peter Costello chaired Channel 9 own the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, there is nowhere to run. Now, it wasn't a surprise result. In fact, it's looking like there is a possibility that Labour will get one more seat than they got in the Dan slide last time. And that is after the most relentlessly toxic media campaign against any premier in Australian history. In a way, it is a repeat of what happened in the federal election, but I suspect most of the media in the federal election wanted rid of Scott Morrison. So it's nowhere near the vitriol that Dan Andrews has had for 2 years straight. People like Peter Credlin turning up at his pressers and just yelling at him. Now, the Murdoch press have been front and centre here. They have run the most toxically anti-Dan Andrews campaign that any leader's faced. Nothing compares to the way that they have inspired legions of Australia's most gullible, angry people in this election. Normally, you know, there'll be right-wing populism has gotten more and more toxic ever since the Tea Party in America, and reaching its apex with the three amigos and Murdoch appointed Boris Johnson in the UK, Scott Morrison in Australia, and Donald Trump in America. But it looks like that was a very short-lived success for him. The Sky at Night, which is his loss-losing version of Fox News, which has a crazy gang of Rowan Dean and Peter Credlin and Andrew Bolt, at one time Alan Jones, and and Chris Kenny, all these people that are a laughingstock as journalism goes, and have relentlessly hammered to a point where it should result in some government oversight or independent body oversight. It isn't doing the country any good to have media like this, but there's a massive silver lining here. The Herald Sun ran something like 105 anti-Dan Andrews attack pieces since the start of November. So just over 3 weeks, 105 attack pieces. But even if you move across to The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, which were traditionally considered a counterweight, if not actually left, their reporting has been just as bad in their own way. They have been very dismissive. They've been calling it a close election. They've been saying about how worried Dan Andrews is the whole way through. What's going on with the Victorian Liberals has barely got a mention. They just expelled 150 Victorian Liberals because of a Pentecostal evangelical attempted takeover of the party, and you will barely read about that. Matthew Guy was a complete farce. There was never any possibility that people would vote for Matthew Guy or the Victorian Liberals. They've probably got less likelihood of voting for the Liberals in Victoria than any other state, or maybe not WA, but the idea that the media promoted this as a close election is utterly shameful and completely wrong. And even the ABC are actually part of this. People keep saying to the ABC, do you realise that the Liberals aren't in power and you're not in danger anymore? The amount of Murdoch hacks or Channel 9, Channel 7, Channel 10 lean broadly the same way as the populist right. And the ABC has been very dismissive of Labour, very abusive towards Labour MPs when they've interviewed them, very dismissive of Labour victories. They'll greet a Labour landslide like this one, or like the amazing success of the federal election is with, shouldn't you be worried about how badly you did? They won't say a thing about the Liberals. This country is absolutely shocking. It is. The aftermath of the federal election was very, very funny. So when these Sky goons who are dealing with the fact that they're irrelevant and the Murdoch press are dealing with their irrelevance, they can't go to the Liberal Party and say, maybe you should be less rabidly right-wing as the public have rejected you, because that would be them admitting the public have rejected them. So they went after the Liberals after the federal election and said, you were too left-wing, you were too woke. We all know that the opposite is true. They have already gone after the Liberals. Many people have gone after the Liberals from the right, saying that you were too woke and too left-wing. By palling up with cookers? I don't think so. But they can't admit it's them that were wrong. Is it the kids or is it me? They have been widely rejected in about 10 elections in this country in a row at state and federal level. They can't admit on Sky at Night or anywhere else in the Murdoch press that populist right wing has been rejected over and over by the public. The populist right, the anti-lockdown crew, the cookers, they make the most noise. The real quiet Australians spoke. In a country, in a state with 90% of people vaccinated, do you really think that cookers and anti-lockdown crew will take you over the line in an election? These people may be very loud, but they have that much influence. Everyone hates them. The media reporting in the lead up to the election was shocking. They made out universally that it was a close election. I kept saying, no, it isn't. It's a complete garbage. Don't lose any sleep about it. The problem is, on one level, is that for news media to engage an audience and therefore get clicks and therefore get advertising revenue and sell their wares, they have to say that the election is close. They have to put as many contentious elements in their reporting as possible to sell things. And even worse, polling companies. Polling companies are notoriously getting things wrong. They need polls to be close, otherwise people won't pay polling companies for their polls. They're not interested if there's a massive wide gap. So they will always tell you it's much closer. They will, I think, my personal opinion, is game the system so that they can get the results that they want. And then we saw the day of the election and the day before election, actually it's going to be a massive gap. They and the media need a close election to sell their wares. Saying that there will be an enormous gulf between Labour and the Liberals won't help them sell anything. So there's that. But there's worse, because there's something more to this. There's this bitterness, even in the ABC, towards Labour when they win. So it's not just about selling things. It's this cabal that seems to be stretching from the Liberal Party and their private boys' schools and all the way through the higher echelons of the media. Everyone seems on the same page. And they seem to represent each other. It's how we end up with people as awful as Scott Morrison. Because he was hated by his own party, but he was roundly supported and given a free pass almost all the way through his time in office, until they couldn't stop reporting how bad he was. And after he left office, we found out he'd tried to take 6 or 7 ministries. A couple of journalists knew about this. I think the head of The Guardian Australia said that it was widely known that these problematic Liberal MPs used to be out on the town drunk with young female staff. They don't tell us. They're all in it together. We need a royal commission specifically into the Murdoch press. We can look back over the last 30 years of their impact on this country, and it has always been bad. It's been bad in the UK since the 1980s. It's been terrifyingly awful in America with Fox News. I would say that he is possibly, by impact on the Western world, the most evil by impact person since probably Hitler. And that might sound hyperbolic, but if you look at the way that he's reshaped politics in a manner that has stopped action on climate change until it's too late, promoted neoliberal economics that has seen hundreds and hundreds of millions of people's lives get worse, his impact is incalculable and hopefully gone. Well, the shining light, which I mentioned, is the media has been rejected in this country. Whereas once having a Murdoch sign-off was so important, Labour prime ministers, and Murdoch used to switch to Labour when he knew that there was time for a reset. The right were doing so bad that he knew that we needed a Labour government for a couple of terms. So he will jump ship and try and shape Labour like he did with Tony Blair, who came out of nowhere. And Keir Starmer in the UK as well is looking like a Murdoch stooge Labour leader. But the public are rejecting it. I don't know if it's the fact that the older generation have been indoctrinated into that kind of populist right-wing talkback radio, Murdoch press, and the news reporting on Channel 9 and 7 and 10 are dying off and being replaced by younger aging voters who don't get their news media or don't believe that news media anything like as much as they did before. It was a universal campaign of hate towards Dan Andrews that had no impact. They might actually gain a seat. They're looking around 55, 56 seats, a complete bloodbath. The Liberals might have their lowest vote since 1980. And this is on the back of COVID and a relentless campaign universally across print media, TV, radio, you name it. They attacked him for 2 years and it had no impact at all. So there's this beautiful light, which is that the Murdoch press is dead in Australia. And it's up to people like the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age and the ABC to realise they are letting us down massively. I don't expect the Murdoch press to change, but the rest of them have been following in their slipstream. And it's up to them to wake up. You don't represent the public at all. News media is about the public interest. And the news media in Australia does not represent the public interest. But happily the public do. And the public have rejected it, leaving perhaps the UK as the last bastion of Murdoch dominance. The UK's gone. The UK would still vote. The UK can't even not vote Tory if they've got a Tory and I'm a celebrity. Get me out here. Half the public loved him. They're like tuned to vote Tory. But this country, you know, I've got a lot of hope. We had the Three Amigos and Murdoch's highest ever point, and now, in a space of a few short years, complete irrelevance. I stand with Dan.